Today, we're proud to announce the next entry in the long-running series of live-action Resident Evil movies. Resident Evil, welcome to RPD. Experience Leon's humble origins as a cop in training, leading him to his most iconic moments.
I just shot the president.
Watch him shoot a gun for the very first time. I just shot a gun. Watch him eat a sandwich. I just ate a sandwich. This matters to you because we said so. Resident Evil is by far one of my favorite series, not just as far as video games go, but in general. I was never a horror fan growing up, but I was a zombie girly. It's only natural that I gravitated towards it. I remember my first experience with Resident Evil was watching my sister play Resident Evil 4.
Resident Evil 4.
And being so scared, just sitting on the menu and watching the opening cutscene. Not even from actually seeing the content of the game, but the simple concept of game scary. As I've gotten older, horror has become one of my favorite genres because it's so incredibly subjective. What I think is scary, you may not, and vice versa. People always say that slashers aren't scary, but like, I don't know. I don't love it when people die, and it's kind of weird that you do. But that's one of the reasons I've grown to love Resident Evil over the years. It's rarely truly objectively horror. It's so camp and has its roots in creature and B-Hollywood action movies. It's less zombie media and horror media and more so monster media. Of course, this isn't the absolute standard for the franchise. There's quite a few outliers for this, like Resident Evil 7 that leans into the horror aspect so much more, and is heavily inspired by films that focused more on horror. It still has its comedic over-the-top elements, but it's also inspired so much more by your grindhouse horror movies, or even like the original Evil Dead.
Groovy. That's not groovy.
It has so many influences to that type of horror. But in contrast, most typical Resident Evil games focus so much more on monsters and creatures and beasts. Resident Evil so heavily features giant animals, a big bat, or you fight suits of armor, and it feels like you're in like a Scooby-Doo gallery. And I love that about it so much that it focuses on a much older version of horror, one that is so much lighter and more fun. It's always trying to one-up itself with ridiculous plots and designs every entry. The way Resident Evil handles horror actually reminds me a lot of how Castlevania does it, if that makes sense. It's horror-themed, but not often outwardly scary. There's definitely an argument to be made about how it was in the beginning, and I agree. Every Resident Evil fan, especially ones that grew up at the time of its release, will tell you how formative seeing so many of these scenes were at the time. The live-action scene in the beginning, like, it's goofy now, but even that was so revolutionary. First, seeing the dog jump through the window. So many moments were an absolute game changer. There was nothing like it when RE1 came out. It was revolutionary, but I've never felt like it was really the point. It wore its inspirations on its sleeve for sure with how campy it is. It knew how campy it was. There's very few mainline entries in the series that don't end with you shooting a rocket into the final boss's face.
You lose, big guy.
Even if it had its fair share of actual scary moments. But all this to say, I'm a huge fan now. From the characters, the set pieces, the albeit often vague story. But people often do a double take when I say that I haven't played many of the games in the series, like, at all. Out of nearly 30 titles, including spin-offs, I've only played a measly 6 entries. These 6, as a matter of fact. Well, and Umbrella Corps, if that counts, but you don't really play that, you survive it. But if that counts, 7. I've never played any of the original trilogy, any remake. I don't even like playing Resident Evil 4. All statements that have weirdly landed me in hot water over the years. There's a recurring argument I see and have personally been told, you can't call yourself a true fan if you haven't personally played the game. While I haven't played most of the series, I've watched almost every single one, whether that be from a friend playing, or a relative, or a streamer. The thought process of you have to play it or you're a fake fan is so limiting, and it's always bizarre to me when I see this opinion come from other fans. Personally, as an RE fan, I'm always happy when there's a mutual love shown for this series, regardless of the reasons. If you just like the characters, if you just like the music, hell, if you're into it just because of the porn, go off, bestie. Obviously, having hands-on experience with a video game can give you a different perspective. I don't think people should be gatekept from enjoying something for whatever reason. There's numerous reasons why someone can't play a certain game, or hell, any game, whether that be personal reasons, or disabilities, or anything, or even the simple fact that some people don't have the time to play a video game. It's this weird assumption that everyone else's life from day to day functions the exact same way as yours does. For example, I have a crippling fear of, well, honestly, a lot, but I'm highly arachnophobic. I can't play Resident Evil 1 or even watch people play it. Sometimes I have to close my eyes when I start hearing those sounds. And as much as people like to tell you over and over, just get over it, I don't think people understand how phobias work. Resident Evil 7 is literally Phobia the game. On top of that, I've always had terrible navigation issues and awful visual memory. It is almost impossible for me to visualize things in my head, and I have almost no object permanence. The way a lot of old Resident Evil games rely on fixed camera makes me immediately forget whatever I just experienced. Classic Resident Evil games rely heavily on backtracking or tedious puzzles. I could push past these things, and I know I could, but it would be an awful experience for me. I don't like feeling dumb. I wouldn't enjoy forcing myself to go through these trials, sometimes very personal ones. And it's not hiding from my flaws. I'd rather spend my life doing something I'm actually going to enjoy. I only play but so many video games at a time anyway. Again, you know, time management. At the end of the day, it's just a video game, and if you're not having fun with that, then what's the point? But because of that, I don't need to be gatekeeping even myself from living this series. To intentionally stop myself from experiencing and loving something just because I'm not ready to play it is crazy. There's so much strength that comes from overcoming these challenges, absolutely, but there's also a time and place. Because of these hurdles and these tones that don't always vibe with me, this is one of the many reasons Resident Evil 5 and 6 are some of my absolute favorites in the series.
Ow! Are you serious? There's no way for me to get over there now! Did you just game over to a snake?
They're without argument a far cry from traditional Resident Evil games, but they're some of the greatest co-op action games of all time. I mean, just look at this and tell me, how can you not love this? I don't trust you if you hate this. Resident Evil 5 is still one of the best co-op games I've ever played, and I still play it almost every year since it came out. Resident Evil 6 is one of the most mechanically advanced third-person shooters ever made. The amount of movement and character expression is still unmatched. It's also impossible to get lost, which I really appreciate. I can't in good faith say people are wrong for dubbing these as bad Resident Evil games, because they are so different. But I can't count how many times I have said or have seen other people say, especially on social media, that Resident Evil 6 is their favorite, only for people to roll their eyes. How dare you have fun with the bad one? If Resident Evil 6 or Devil May Cry 2 or Bomberman 0 are your favorite entries in the respective series, you are brave, and I see you. You will change the world one day. But to me, they're perfect because they capture everything that I need from a Resident Evil game. I'm not a Resident Evil fan just because of the game feel or the raw thrill of shooting an elephant. I don't need to be scared. I don't need to be dealing with my phobias and shit like that. My favorite parts are the characters and the types of storytelling that really only Capcom can do. It's a horror franchise, but it's always very optimistic. Rarely, if ever, has a bad ending. I love tales of survival and unrealistic characters to look up to. I love Chris Redfield and his journey from becoming a rookie to a superhero to a gay superhero. The ending of Resident Evil Village and the DLC literally made me cry. I love women. All valid reasons to love this series. Claire activates something in my brain, like a lesbian sleeper agent. People say that you have to physically play a game to enjoy it, but that's like saying you can't truly enjoy a movie unless you are behind the camera. I don't need to command a character to go with them on their journey. I don't need to learn how to backwards long jump to love Mario. If you love Resident Evil, or any series, any type of media or franchise, no matter how you got into it, I want you to feel welcomed. And I hope the same sentiment applies to someone like me. And that's my assessment for this week, everybody. Thank you so much for watching. As always, give this as much love as you can. Let me know in the comments. I'm usually not one of those bitches that's like, oh, like, comment, and subscribe, but it like genuinely helps me. So if you want to play along a little bit, let me know in the comments what your favorite Resident Evil is, and maybe how you got into the series. I love hearing about this kind of thing. How someone discovered something, especially if it's a piece of media that I hold dear. I always love hearing how people got into it, so let me know. Also, as a side note, I recently launched my Patreon. So if you like what I do here, if you want to ensure that I can keep making videos and content in general, whether that be videos or art or really anything, consider supporting me. It'll help me so much. You can find anything like that in the description as usual. I thank you so much for watching again. I will try to be back in 2 weeks like usual. So until then, please have a lovely day or night, wherever it is where you are. And thank you so much for watching. Bye-bye.
This is your only chance. If Wesker succeeds, Uroboros will be spread across the globe. Millions will die.
Oh, yeah, but...
I'm all right.